I am tired of people. Well, should I say people are tired of me? I tried to be friendly, but they just ignore me as if I don't exist. Just because I'm a simple plain old man with no fancy suits or whatever it is that makes them all think they're too good to even answer me. That's one of the main reasons I became a hermit. I didn't want to depend on anyone, and I didn't want anyone to depend on me. But what's really making me mad is I am up here alone, away from everyone else. But still these property developers or builders or whatever you call them are wanting to tear down my house. Well, so help me God, I won't let them, even if it means I'll stand in front of the bulldozers when they're trying to demolish it. I just sit and look out the window to pass the time. I don't bother anybody, why should they bother me? I suppose I'm known as that crazy old hermit to the locals down the hill. Well, they can stay down the hill, away from me, and let me live my life the way I want. I'm not harming anyone. I heard voices outside. It's not often I hear voices, so I assumed it was the builders. And I was right. There were 2 men standing outside. I opened my door and shouted at them, "Get the hell away from my property, do you hear me?" But as usual, they ignored me. One man asked the other, "What happened to the owner of this place?" The other man replied, "He was a nice poor old man. He was found dead one night, stabbed to death. No reason could be found. He had no known enemies, and the poor guy had no family." The man asked, what was the other man's name? The other man told him, Peter.
Me and my friends were looking for something fun to do during the summer holidays. One of my friends had an idea. There was a woman living down a lonely lane about a mile from where we lived. Word around town was she was a witch. That's all we were told. She was a witch and to stay away from her house, even her lane. We were feeling very adventurous, and even as dangerous as the idea sounded, we welcomed it, due to the sheer fact of how dangerous and exciting it might be. We were just outside her gate when we noticed how creepy her house was. I guessed no wonder it was creepy if she is meant to be some kind of witch. We climbed over the wall and into her garden and noticed a beautiful big apple tree with bright red apples all over it. My friend had a bag with her, so we started picking apples off the ground and put them in the bag. We all jumped when we heard a woman's voice behind us. It was her, the witch that everyone was speaking about. I knew because I was shown a photo of her before. I said, "I'm so sorry, miss. We didn't realise this was private property." The woman looked at us and spoke. "Nonsense, my dear. Why pick up those windfalls from the ground? Why don't ye climb up the tree and pick the big bright red ones, and when ye are finished, why don't ye just come in and I'll give ye a nice soda?" We were so relieved that the woman wasn't mad and she actually seemed really nice. We climbed the tree and picked about a dozen or more apples, then knocked at the woman's door. She opened it and there was a lovely smell of apple tart coming from her oven. She said, "I just made a lovely apple tart for ye. Sit down and make yourselves comfortable, and I'll get ye some tart and some soda." We all sat down, and 2 minutes later, the lady brought us a slice of apple tart and some soda. My friends started drinking the soda and eating the apple tart. I didn't feel like drinking or eating, but I pretended to, as I didn't want to insult the lady for her being so nice. I felt awful knowing the rumours about her being a witch when she was such a sweet old lady. A few minutes later, I saw my friends act really strange, as if they felt drowsy and wondered what was happening. I walked over to the door, but as I did, I could see the woman standing looking at me with what looked like a big black cauldron that witches have in movies. I could see a bottle of poison on top of the sink. I realised then she had poisoned my friends. I tried to scream, but no scream came out as I was so much frozen in fear. Then she spoke in a creepy voice, looking me right in the eye, and said, "Witchcraft." I was walking home from my friend's house, and I was feeling kinda tired. We were out walking around the city all day. I just wanted to get back home as soon as possible, as I have an early start for school in the morning. So I decided to take a shortcut. There was a tunnel between my house and a field, and I never liked to go there. By day, don't mind say night. It usually was littered with drug paraphernalia and addicts and other undesirables. I decided to take the shortcut tonight and walked into it. Luckily, there was no one about. I noticed something strange in the middle of the tunnel and got out my phone using its torch to see what it was. It was a walkie-talkie. I collect all sorts of retro stuff and wondered, was this an old-style walkie-talkie? So brought it home with me. When I got home, I sat down on the bed and looked at it and pressed the button to call whoever had the other walkie-talkie. I waited for a reply on the off chance I'd be within distance range of someone with the corresponding walkie-talkie. Suddenly, I froze on the bed in fear when I heard a noise of a walkie-talkie coming from inside my closet. I stood up and could see a figure standing inside my closet. It was a beautiful summer's day, and me and my friend decided to visit a local castle called Ballet Castle. We walked for miles to see it, and it was all worth it when we saw what such a beautiful castle it was. Me and my friend were walking around the countryside when we discovered a beautiful white horse painted up on the side of a cliff. We didn't climb up to see it up close, as it was pretty steep and we didn't have the energy to go climbing up anyway. We got a start when someone suddenly came out of the bushes. It was a man holding a bucket of white paint. I told him it was a beautiful idea. Oh yes, it looks beautiful maybe, but there's a sad story behind it. I asked him, what was it? And he began to tell us the story about the white horse. Years and years ago, there was a beautiful farmer's daughter who fell deeply in love with a local farmer's son. They used to love being in each other's company and wander through the hills holding each other's hand. The girl used to ride a white horse that used to shine bright against the sun on a lovely summer's day. The boy and girl knew that what they had together was true love, so she told her father they wanted to get married. Her father lost his temper instantly and shouted in a rage. No way was she going to marry that boy, and she would marry a man of his choice. There was a huge argument between herself and her father over it, so she ran out crying and jumped on her horse and went riding through the woods. The girl was screaming for her life as the white horse bolted over the edge of the cliff, with both daughter and horse falling to their deaths. The white horse was painted on the cliff to mark this fateful day. I told the man what a sad story. Suddenly, me and my friend heard a horse behind us galloping, and when we looked back to the man, he was gone.
Of all the money that e'er I spent it in good company, and of all the harm that e'er I've done, alas, it was to none but me, and all I've done for want of wit to memory I can't recall. So fill to me the parting glass. Good night and joy be with you all.
My name is Jack, and I was reading a book after a long day in school when I saw a black cat enter the living room. We had no cats, so I was wondering how it got in. My parents were out, so I decided to feed it and asked him what was his name. The cat said, "Meow." The cat was lapping up the milk, then licked his lips. I decided to ask my parents when they came home, can I keep the cat? Suddenly I heard someone say, "Here, kitty." I looked around and saw a little girl in the corner of the room. I jumped and screamed, and with that, the girl and cat disappeared. When my parents came home, I explained everything to them, but they seemed to have just dismissed it. That night, I heard arguing in my parents' bedroom. I heard my mom say to my dad he should have never have bought this house, knowing there was a little girl killed just outside the door. I burst in the door asking what little girl was killed there. Then they explained to me that years ago a little girl was trying to catch a cat from crossing the road, but got ran over and killed. I felt sorry for the little girl, but also felt very afraid that the little girl I saw today in the living room was no doubt the ghost of that girl, and to make it more creepy, that was her cat.
Henry was down on his luck after years of alcohol abuse and running around with different gangs. He started when he was about 8, beating up a poor innocent bystander for him to do some sort of gang initiation. As he grew older, he got more into the gangland lifestyle, but drugs and alcohol took his soul with everything else his demons were destroying. He was walking down the street one day and sat down and started drinking to pass a few hours away. People always walked past, getting on with their busy lives. He didn't ask people for money. He was still into petty crime and muggings here and there, so that's how he funded his drug and drink habit. He wouldn't blame people passing him. He knew he was the type that people would no way like to meet down a dark alley, and they wouldn't be wrong. He would stab a person for $20. With all that said, he was very surprised to see a man dressed in all black stop and ask him was he okay. He spoke to Henry for about 5 minutes, and Henry told him he used to be a builder, which was partly true. Henry did do a bit of building here and there when he used to run with gangs. The man seemed to be impressed with Henry and offered him work. He told Henry, "I have a job for you. Do you make some money for yourself? I need a new house built out in the countryside, and I would love you to build it for me. I will fund it all, of course, but one thing, please don't spare anything. I will foot the bill, so I want the best of everything in that house. The best heating, the best bricks, or whatever else it takes to have the best of the best." Henry's face lit up and he said, "Of course, I know all the best ways to make the best house for you. You'll have the best house in town." Over the next few months, Henry was building the house and was given a nice sum of money for doing it. He put his idea into plan by asking the man for money for the most expensive ways of building the house, but keeping most of the money for himself and building it the cheapest way he could. He spent the extra money on drink and drugs and partying every time he wasn't building the house. He also took his time building it to stretch out the money he was getting from the strange man. A few months later, the house was built, and Henry told the man he didn't spare anything building the best house he could for him. The man smiled and said, "Henry, you were so good and such a great worker. I must congratulate you. The reason I told you don't spare anything building the best house is because that house you just built, Henry, is all yours. You can move in today if you like." Henry was beating himself up inside, knowing that if he had known the house was going to be his, he would have used the man's money for the best of everything. A few weeks later, Henry was in the kitchen, drinking coffee, when he suddenly noticed a leak in the ceiling. Suddenly, the roof caved in and the whole house fell down, burying Henry under the rubble. It was rural Ireland, and Patrick was really looking forward to make his first Holy Communion. His friends were all talking in school about wearing a really cool black suit or brown suit, but he heard nobody speak about a white suit. He used to love watching the old gangster movies with his parents, and they all wore white suits and really cool patent black and white shoes. He was very poor and his parents couldn't even afford a suit. Don't mind, say, a really cool white suit like the ones he used to watch in the old gangster movies. His mom knew a woman called Breda who used to make dresses, suits, cardigans, jumpers, etc. Patrick asked his mom to ask Breda how much would it be to make a white suit like the gangsters used to wear in the movies. Breda gave a price which he would be years saving up if he put away every single bit of pocket money he earned, and he knew that wouldn't work. 1. He had to buy food for school. 2. His communion would be long over by the time he saved enough money to get the suit made. Finally, when he was telling his dad's friend, he was given a chance to make his dream become a reality. Joe, his dad's friend, said to Patrick, "Well there, boy, you sure have your heart set on this white suit. What is it, nearly 2 months to your Holy Communion? Well, why don't you help me out in the factory? We make chairs, tables, and all sorts of really nice furniture." Patrick's face lit up and he said enthusiastically, "Gee, sir, that sounds a mighty swell idea." Joe said, "Well, ask your mom and dad, is it okay, and I can get you started in the next few days." Patrick's parents thought the idea was great and gave him the go-ahead, but made him promise to finish any schoolwork he had before he started his workday. Patrick finished school at 2:30, had his homework done by 4, and went out to work at 4:30 every day and finished at 7:30. He worked Monday to Friday and got around Joe to give him an extra day on Saturday where he worked from 9 to 1. After the first week, Patrick was exhausted. He learned how to use the saws and the cutting machine, etc. One day, while cutting a piece of wood for a table, he was feeling exhausted and his eyes closed for a few seconds. Everyone was startled and looked around. Patrick fell on top of the saw and there was blood pumping out of where his arm should have been. The saw cut his left arm completely off. The blood squirted on people as they came to help him. Patrick was sent to the nearest hospital and was depressed knowing he had his arm cut off on top of not having any money to buy his white suit. He was very withdrawn in school when he went back, but his friends were very supportive, apart from 2 bullies, Fred and Gary, who seemed to be evil. They used to bully him before his accident, and they didn't stop after. Since the accident, Patrick didn't feel right. Something was strange. He had a beautiful dream and wished it happened in real life. To his shock, a day later, his dream became a reality. The dream that became a reality was that word got out around the community about his accident, and it made the local and even national newspapers. Word got out, and Patrick was thrilled one day when a parcel arrived for him. His mom called him and told him. He opened it up and his face lit up when he saw that it was a really cool white suit, just like the one he wanted. The next day, 3 parcels arrived with white suits, the next 5, and by the end of the week, there were hundreds of white suits sent by people who heard about the story on the news. Patrick was thrilled, telling his friends at school about the suits and said there were so many they all had to be kept in their shed. Unfortunately, the 2 bullies, Fred and Gary, overheard him. They had planned to sneak into the shed tomorrow night, which would be Friday night, and throw red paint all over the suits and cut them to shreds. Patrick was really excited looking through all his white suits before going to school. It was sports day, so Patrick played different sports and had fun with his friends. Fred and Gary were unusually quiet. That night, Fred and Gary were putting their plan into action, and they both planned to have a sleepover and snuck out of their house and went to the shed in Patrick's garden. They were delighted to see it wasn't even locked. Fred whispered, "See, I told you, who'd want to lock a garden shed?" They both opened the door, slow, ready to throw the red paint all over the suits and cut them to shreds. As the door opened, they both screamed as there was a huge bang of his dad's bear trap, trapping the boys' legs. They screamed in pain as they both had their legs caught in the bear trap his dad brought over years ago from his hunting days in America. Patrick walked into view wearing a white suit, feeling like the gangsters in the old gangster movies. He held up his dad's shotgun and pointed at them and said, "Now I really feel like a gangster in those old gangster movies." The boys were screaming in pain, and Patrick smiled, thankful of his new quality. Since having the accident, he dreams of his future, which gave him the psychic visions of the two boys breaking in, ruining his suits. The boys tried, but couldn't figure out how he knew what they had planned. Patrick and his parents could not understand that when he woke up the morning after the accident, his arm was right there where it was ripped off the day before during the accident. He wore a cast in school for the next couple of weeks to avoid having to explain what they can't even explain. Julie and Jake were having a difficult time in their marriage. They decided to take a train journey across America. What Julie hadn't known was Jake, her husband, only organised the journey to organise a hitman to kill her on the train. Julie was sitting down reading a book, while Jake said he was going to get a drink in the train's bar. As Julie was reading, a man sat down next to her, introducing himself as Andy, and asked her for the time. Julie found it strange, knowing these days anyone should have the time when they have a phone. The man introduced himself to Julie. This was all part of Jake's plan. 15 minutes later, Jake had arrived, and as planned, he told her an old friend of hers was in the next carriage. He recognised me and was asking for her. Of course, there was no school friend. The plan was that the hitman pushed Julie out of the train door when she went to see what friend. Jake hoped she'd take the bait and smiled when she did. Julie walked towards the door. Jake would have loved to have watched it happen, but knew it would be too obvious. The hitman was wearing gloves and an aesthetic face, just in case there were cameras they missed scoping the train out a few days ago. Jake had planned to walk up to the next carriage in about 15 minutes to get clarification the job was done. He was about to walk into the next carriage when the man said, "Hi sir, nice journey, isn't it?" Jake smiled, knowing those were the exact words he was meant to say. Jake replied, "Is the job done?" The man said, "Well, I got to chat a lot with your wife. She seems a very nice lady, but most importantly, He was looking behind Jake's shoulder at this moment. Jake turned around to see what he was looking at, and with his shock, he saw Julie staring at him with hatred in her eyes. The man continued to speak. "More importantly, your wife. She seems to be a very sweet lady, and may I say a very beautiful lady." Jake was dumbfounded and said in a confused tone, "What's going on here?" Julie spoke. "Let me explain. And this hitman here who goes by the name of Andy, which I call Andrew, is not just a regular hitman. We have been dating for the last 6 months. Wait, should I change that to we have been having an affair for the last 6 months? And she gave a sinister smile. Jake didn't know what was happening. He spoke quietly so no other passengers could hear him. "What is happening here? How do ye know each other?" Andrew explained. "When you first made contact with me, did you not realize it was me who first made contact with you?" Jake still couldn't understand how a hitman he hired on the dark web could have been having an affair with his wife he ordered to kill before he even made contact. Jake said, "Wait a minute. You said you made contact with me first." Suddenly Andrew said, "Well, we told a tiny lie, but it's not about me making contact first." With that, Andrew pulled off his prosthetic mask, revealing the face of their marriage counsellor they had for the last 6 months. It was Andrew and Julie were having an affair, and because of Julie not trusting her husband, she checked his phone one time when he left it on the bed for 5 minutes while he shaved. Just as he left, she picked it up in order to not have to put in any code that she knew she wouldn't be able to guess. He'd just been on it, so she didn't have to put in any access code. She went through it and came across a text that said all the information and money needs to be transferred to this email address. I will have the job done once the money is sent through Bitcoin to this account. Julie had no idea what it was, but sent an email saying, "I will send the money, but I need to know exactly what you're going to do. I need to know exactly every detail of what I'm paying for." Julie changed the real email, so no matter what email Jake sent would not get sent and would not be received by the hitman. But she changed it by adding a dot that was barely seen. But Julie kept contact and brought the hit forward, of course, with the real hitman thinking he was in contact with Jake. Julie had been on the train waiting for the hitman to arrive, and when he did, there were undercover police ready to arrest him as soon as he asked for the time. They waited until a guy with a prosthetic face of Jake clarified with the hitman did he finish the job. Then the undercover police moved in. The real Jake was shocked to learn that the hitman was arrested a week ago, and he was going to be arrested now. Julie looked at him and said, "You son of a bitch." Hi, my name is Susie. It was Friday night and me and my friends were invited to hang out at my friend Sarah's house. Her parents weren't home. We were watching a cool, scary movie when Sarah had an idea. She suggested we use a Ouija board that she found a few weeks ago in her attic. I was kind of freaked out, as I didn't like to mess with the unknown, but I didn't want to be the odd one out, so I agreed. We all sat around the table like you'd see in horror movies, and Sarah was holding the planchette, asking were there any spirits in the room. It was me, Julie and her boyfriend Warren. I remember the light going out, and I initially thought that they were all just playing a prank on me. I felt like, here it goes, making a fool out of Susie again. But what happened next could not be explained. All I can remember is waking up on top of a grave in the local graveyard. I have no explanation how it happened, but worse again, it was so hard to explain to the police without them treating us like we murdered Sarah and Warren or something. I was being questioned in an interrogation room and worried they thought I killed them or something. I could see that the two policemen were talking outside the door and knew maybe if I could walk up next to it, I could listen. I walked over to the door and listened. What I heard next made me freeze with fear. I heard one of the cops tell the other, "These kids are playing some sick joke with us. That kid Warren they're talking about, his dad was involved in a hit and run this morning. It didn't even make the papers, but wait for it, you were off duty so you might not know. The person his dad ran over in his car is this Sarah girl they're talking about. She was killed yesterday morning." I tried to make sense of how Sarah asked me and my other friends to her house when she was dead. Then it hit me like a Mac 10 truck. Sarah was dead when we were using the Ouija board, and she wanted to use it to bring us all over to the other side with her. But it did not work with me or Julie. But unfortunately, it worked with Warren, the son of the man who killed her in the hit and run. It was Sam's birthday, and he decided to celebrate it with just his sister and parents this year because of how much drama there was at his birthday last year. Sam was having an argument with his parents because they wouldn't allow him on the Ferris wheel, so he got very angry and ran off with temper. He ran outside of the fun fair and was walking along the road sulking. He suddenly noticed a car driving slowly beside him, and the window was pulled down. A weird-looking man dressed in a black suit stared right at him with a weird look and said, "You're next." Sam got chills up his spine and turned and ran back into the fun fair. He saw his sister with his parents. They were talking to a cop, and Sam's dad saw him and told the cop, and they walked over to Sam. A couple of minutes later, they were all sitting eating popcorn when Sam's dad said, "Well, I suppose it wouldn't hurt you riding the Ferris wheel." Sam's mom looked at her husband and said, "What?" Sam couldn't understand why his parents were so against him riding the Ferris wheel, but he was happy he was going to ride it, so he just jumped up and gave his parents a high five and shouted, "Awesome!" Sam walked over to the Ferris wheel and waited in the queue. When he got to the top of the queue, the man selling the tickets looked down at him and said, "You're next." It was the exact same man in the car. Sam ran away from the wheel and up to his parents and shouted, "It's him! It's him!" Sam's parents both said, "Who?" Suddenly, Sam's dad made eye contact with the man taking the tickets. The man turned and ran, but Sam's dad took chase after him. Finally, he caught him and said, "What the hell do you think you're doing?" The man said, "You know what happened with this wheel this exact night last year." Recognition came to him right away. It was the father of a kid who shared the same birthday with Sam, and they were at the fun fair last year. The man could see it was all coming back to Sam's dad and walked up close to him. In the background, their ferris wheel was on fire. The people on it were screaming and shouting as they stopped it. The man purposely set fire to the wheel, and it was meant for his son. The man screamed at Sam's dad, "This very night last year, you and your silly wife offered to take my son to the fun fair to share his birthday with your son. What did you do? You left him go on this messed up Ferris wheel and he fell out from halfway up. Lucky he has survived, but do you know he has nightmares every single night?" The man got out a gun and pointed it at Sam's dad, but there were several policemen nearby shouted, "Drop the weapon." The man was arrested, and Sam, his sister and parents went home and decided next year to celebrate his birthday at home. Sarah was looking for extra pocket money, so jumped at the chance of seeing a babysitting job on offer on the local mall's notice board. There was a sign saying babysitter job wanted to mind 8-year-old girl on weekends. Sarah smiled as the weekends suited her perfectly, as she couldn't babysit on school nights. She rang the number right away and met the parents, and hit it off instantly. Sarah started work on Friday. She was greeted at the door by the girl's mom. She was acting kinda strange and said to Sarah, "My daughter's name is Jess. She can be a bit troublesome at times, so I hope you don't think it's strange, but we have her locked in her room. I hope you don't think we're awful, but she really can get up to a lot of mischief." Sarah found it very strange how they could lock an 8-year-old girl up in her room all night. The mother realised Sarah was wondering, was the little girl kept prisoner in her room? So she said, "Don't worry, Jess isn't locked in her room when we're at home. It's just you're a new babysitter and she will need time to adjust." An hour later, the parents were gone out, and Sarah was sitting down in the living room on her own, feeling awful that the poor little girl was all on her own, locked in her room. How cruel her parents must be to do it. Sarah walked up the stairs and called out, "Jess, are you there?" "I'm in here," the little girl said. Then she said, "My parents keep the key above the door. Could you please let me out?" Sarah felt sorry for the little girl and opened the door and let her out. The girl was no trouble. She went downstairs with Sarah and just started drawing while Sarah was watching TV. A few minutes later, a black cat walked into the room. Sarah was surprised as she didn't see the cat before. Then, with more surprise, a dog walked into the room. Yet again, Sarah had never seen the dog in the house before, and she walked around it just after the parents left. Then suddenly, the dog attacked the cat, ripping it apart with blood flying everywhere in the room. Jess, the little girl, didn't even seem to notice. She was just lost in a world of her own, drawing on pages. Sarah couldn't believe her eyes what happened next. A load of birds seemed to enter the room all of a sudden. Sarah went to grab the little girl's hand to take her to safety, but the little girl screamed, "Stop, I'm drawing." With that, all the pages the little girl was drawing on fell to the ground. One page had a cat, the next had a dog. The next page, a dog attacking the cat. The next page had lots of birds. The little girl had one page hidden from her, clutching it to her chest, when Sarah grabbed it and looked at it and froze in fear, knowing that everything the girl drew before happened in real life soon after. A rope fell from the middle of the air and went around her neck and lifted her up, hanging her. Me and my friends were camping for the weekend, and we were really excited, as we had planned it for weeks. There were 4 of us, 2 boys and 2 girls, 2 couples. We were deep in the woods when we decided to set up our tent. Each couple had their own tent. It was a moonlit night, so the brightness that was there was coming through the trees, even though it was still very dark, as the trees blocked out most of the moonlight, which added to the creepiness of the whole atmosphere deep in the woods. We lit a fire in the middle of the space we set up the tent. It was hard work gathering the wood, harder than I expected. I never expected it to be so hard building a fire in the woods. In the movies, it's almost like the fire is already there. After the fire was lit, we started drinking some beer and told ghost stories. Suddenly, when it was my time to tell my story, I heard some noise over by the trees. I feared it was a bear or even some crazy stalker. My friend walked over to investigate, and he suddenly jumped and screamed, then started laughing and said, "Oh my god, guys, ye are so over-dramatic." Then suddenly something caught his eye. He was bending down to look at something in the grass and picked it up. He seemed to be holding a piece of wood, and whatever was on it was making him act very strange. We all asked him, what was it? When he walked over, he showed us and said, "That's weird, right?" It was a piece of wood with "Find Me" written in red. I felt fear overcome me, wondering, could it even be blood? My friend said, "What the hell is this about?" I said, "It looks pretty weird. I mean, find who?" My other friend was laughing, saying, "Maybe it's the boogeyman. Woo!" His girlfriend started laughing until there was another noise from over the other side of the clearing. My friend walked over and yet again saw another piece of wood with writing on it. He brought it over to show us. "I'm down this direction. Keep going." We all said together, "No way are we going down there." I didn't feel comfortable going to sleep, but it was too late to trek back out of the woods at this time of night, so we just decided to call it a night and be happy to get out of here in the morning. When we were just about to rest our heads and get some sleep, I noticed there was a shadow of a hand outside my tent. I froze in fear, anticipating what it could be outside, and told my boyfriend. He reluctantly opened the zip of the tent, and there, outside of the tent, was a little boy drenched from head to toe in water. He was about 10 years old, and he was crying, saying, "Why didn't anyone find me?" Suddenly, he seemed to disappear into thin air. We had the pieces of wood with the writing gathered outside, so we decided to keep them to tell the police the next day. When we did, the sheriff looked at us strange. "Ye damn kids, playing these sick games. Why can't ye let that poor boy rest?" That night, we learned that 10 years ago, on that very night, in the direction the piece of wood was telling us to go, a 10-year-old boy drowned while running from his parents to hide while they were playing hide and seek. My friend and I always used to walk through a wonderful spacious park when we were younger. It was full of tall trees and it was very nicely maintained. In this large park there was an abandoned mansion. I can't really say how long it had been there, but on that day the front door of the mansion was wide open. The two of us decided to check out what was inside the place. As we inched through the door, the very first thing we noticed was that the mansion's floor was littered with crumpled up pieces of paper. We looked at each other and observed that there was no furniture, nothing except for those wrinkled balls of paper. The mansion had 6 rooms on its main floor, and every room we entered bore more and more scrunched up pieces of paper. We decided to open up one of the paper balls to see what was inside. Our curiosity got the better of us. I picked up a single wrinkled piece, and as my friend picked up another, I unfolded my paper, smoothing out its bends and dents. At that moment, it was almost as if a piece of a rainbow emerged before our eyes, and I was suddenly standing next to a large window in one of the upstairs rooms of the house. I was looking outside into the large park when I looked down at the piece of paper I held. It read, "Look outside the large window that oversees the park in the upstairs parlour." I dropped the piece of paper and it fluttered gracefully to the ground. Meanwhile, I stared at my open hands in a bout of horror. Dazed and utterly perplexed, I found my way downstairs and met up with my friend. He was in the kitchen, sitting at a round table that hadn't been there before. Where did that come from? I wondered. My friend stared at his opened paper and reread the words several times before he looked at me and turned the page my way. It said, "Go to the kitchen and sit at the round table." We stared at each other for a few moments, vaguely afraid, but then we began to chuckle. Within seconds, we were laughing our heads off, marvelling at our newfound game. We could hardly believe what had happened, but being young as we were, the mystery was endlessly exciting. we decided again to open up another scrunched piece of paper. As we opened up the crumpled papers on the floor, we experienced the same sudden flash of rainbow colours. But this time I ended lying down in the field behind the mansion. When I peered onto the paper in my right hand, it read, "Lie down in the field behind the mansion." I giggled uncontrollably. After a few minutes of running around the house, I found my friend collecting multiple balls of paper in his arms, eager to experience more of these strange, exciting phenomena. We both got the gist of what was happening at this point. We had no idea as to how it was possible, but we decided to have more fun with it. The supernatural always had a way of captivating our hearts. After a few more run-throughs with these strange mini teleportation devices, I began to feel apprehensive. I wondered if at one point I would be placed somewhere I didn't want to be, or I'd be made to do something that I didn't enjoy. We continued though. Minute after minute we unfolded many papers and travelled through bedrooms, closets, trees. But then, after having been on the roof of the mansion, I stood before my friend, dead on the living room floor. I didn't scream. I couldn't murder him. I read on my crumpled page as I felt a surge of vomit and bile rising into my throat. Nothing came out, but the sickness in my throat spread to my stomach, my head, and my heart. I didn't know what to do at this point. I began to scream and shout, praying to God for this to be a nightmare. I wanted it to go away. I wanted to rewind our day and be outside again, together walking underneath the trees. I willed myself to be calm, and I hesitantly unfolded another paper in the hopes that the problem would correct itself. Once again, I saw the colours of the rainbow, and I found myself standing behind a tree several meters away from the house. I could clearly see the front door within a few instants. I saw both myself and my friend walk through that door. I began to wonder if I had died or if I was having an out-of-body experience. I looked at the sheet in my hand, and the only words scrawled upon it were, "Time will repeat itself, and a paradox will take place, and it will be allowed." That gave me an idea. In my pocket remained the paper that made me kill my friend. Without looking at it, I crumpled it back up. Quietly, I followed my other self, who had separated from my friend, as he explored the rooms of the house. As I crept behind him, he turned around very suddenly. Before he could utter a syllable, I forced the paper in front of my eyes, and in a flash of rainbow colours, I was able to kill my other self. The laws of time allowed me to take over my dead self's place in this world, and also because of the fact that it was allowed to happen. As it was written on the second piece of paper that I had on me, which reversed time. It must have control over time and paradoxes, which made me now the new alive and present of my other dead self. I hid my limp, bleeding other dead self in a cupboard in the upstairs bathroom to rot. To my great relief, I heard my friend call my name from downstairs. My friend who managed to stay alive, and well, my best friend. When I went downstairs, he greeted me excitedly, smiling childishly, and being blissfully unaware of the situation. I pretended that nothing had happened. In a heartbeat, I told him that the house creeped me out and that it would be much better if we left. After that day, we never went near the mansion again. I don't know if anyone saw or heard about anything that happened between us, but I recently heard from another friend that the house had been demolished. I dreaded the probable prospect that my corpse was uncovered in the bathroom cabinet. It was a beautiful summer's day, and I was walking along the countryside to unwind from a hard week's work. I was never down this road, and the reason is because I took a break from work for a week in as backward a place as I could get in the middle of Texas. This was my first day here, and I must admit the scenery is beautiful. I came across a farm, and suddenly, breaking the peaceful tranquility of the countryside atmosphere, I heard a screech. I wondered what could it have been, so I investigated. I walked behind the barn and could see, way down a hill, a man with a huge knife, and it looked like he was about to cut the other man's head off. I felt goosebumps crawl all over my body, and I just froze, afraid I'd let him know I was here, and he would definitely kill me also for witnessing it. I hid behind the barn, then took another peek down the hill to see were they still there. Then I ran as fast as I could. About an hour later, I found a local police station and explained it to the sheriff. He said he would drive out there right away, and he took my number and he said he would keep me updated. The weird thing was, the sheriff told me he went down to the place I mentioned, but there was no barn and no farm, but just overgrown fields. I couldn't understand what was happening and pleaded with him to drive me down to where I saw it. I was dumbfounded when we got there, as it was just how the sheriff said. There was no barn, but just overgrown fields. The sheriff asked me, was I on something, or had I the wrong place? But I knew I hadn't the wrong place. The question was, how and why was it so different? I went back to my motel a few hours later and lied on my bed pondering what was wrong. I tried to come up with some explanation but failed miserably. I got up and switched on the TV, and suddenly numbers popped up on the screen. 120 618 19. I wondered what they popped up for, and had a strange feeling to write them down. I tried to get some sleep then, but was woken by a sound outside the motel. There was an envelope down on the ground. I picked it up, wondering what it was. Wondering was it for me? There was a receipt for a knife. I thought it very strange, and wondered, was someone playing some kind of sick trick on me? But then my eyes caught something very, very strange. On the paper, I saw the receipt's order number. Looked very familiar. So I took out the piece of paper I had wrote the numbers on that were written on the TV. Sure enough, the numbers matched the receipt's order number, which was 120 618 19. I then thought maybe the motel had their own way of putting an order number on the TV. But I hadn't ordered anything. My curiosity was growing, and suddenly I had an idea. What if I searched those numbers online? I got out my laptop and searched them, and my jaw dropped and my heart thumped in my chest when I saw what I saw. On the 12th of the 6th, in 1819, there was an execution taking place on this exact date. Today was the 12th of the 6th, 2019, exactly 200 years after that date. I suddenly realised the significance of the numbers. I looked at the photo and saw the two men that I just saw earlier. I felt shivers run up my spine as I tried to fathom how did I become a witness to an execution that happened 200 years ago, unless for the unbelievable idea that I must have somehow travelled through a time warp to travel back 200 years to witness it. I couldn't understand what was happening. I jumped when suddenly I heard a knock on the door. I answered it, and what I saw, I would never, ever forget. It was the man who was killing the other man in the field, standing right before me. He raised his knife and was about to kill me when suddenly he disappeared. I told a few people, but they wouldn't believe me. I am very afraid that someday the man will come back to kill me, maybe because I witnessed the execution 200 years ago. But as I said, no one would believe me, but the fear is rooted deep in me, and I regret ever coming to this God-forsaken town. I was walking home one night, and while I was walking along, I noticed some type of pop-up shop, place that I've never seen before. It had written on a sign, "Come in and take the free test and find out the real you and find yourself." I always used to hear my friends talking about different ways of finding themselves. Some used yoga meditation, others just liked to take long walks in the countryside. I could definitely do with being in tune with myself more, so I decided to walk in and see what it was all about. And if it is free, there's no hidden costs. Well, what harm can it do? There was a man dressed like a doctor, and he greeted me with a big smile and said, "Welcome, sir. You have come to the right place if you are looking to find yourself." We exchanged pleasantries, and then he started the test. The thing was, he had covered my eyes with some kind of pair of goggles, and I could see weird shapes and colours, etc. And before I knew it, the test seemed to be over. I asked him, "Is that it? Do I need to answer any questions or anything?" He replied, "No, the test is done, and I hope you will be able to get in touch with yourself very soon and find yourself." I found it weird how he kept mentioning the term "find myself," but I thanked him and walked out of his place. As I was walking down the road, I noticed someone wearing the same jacket as me. I put that down to just some person having the same jacket as me. But things got very weird when the next two people I passed were wearing the same jacket. I couldn't understand how so many people could wear the same jacket as me. Then what I saw, I almost fainted with fear and shock and astonishment. Right in front of me, there were two people talking, but those two people were me. I froze on the spot, with my eyes fixed on two people who looked exactly like me. I thought back to what the man kept saying. He hoped I'd find myself. There were a group of people walking past me, and once again, they were all me. I ran back to where the man was, but when I got there, he had gone and there was no pop-up shop. I have explained to people how it had happened and how can they be me, but they say that I must be suffering from some delusion. They have now put me in an asylum, but I know I am not crazy. I know that whatever that guy did to me during the test has messed with me big time. I can't look at anybody without looking at myself. Things took a huge turn when I happened to look into a door and saw a doctor standing over a person wearing the exact same goggles I had worn for the test. I knew I wasn't crazy, and this is proof that something sinister is going on. Suddenly some guards caught me looking and handcuffed me. I hope and pray that whatever they have done to me will go away soon and I can get out of this hellhole, which no doubt is a base for whatever operation they are performing on people. And I wish I never, ever did that damn test. I work for a small newspaper company, and I usually just write about things happening in the community. One story though got me particularly interested, and it was about a woman who lived in filth. Her neighbours had been complaining about odd foul smells coming from her house. It isn't the type of story that I usually do, but it was different, and that's what got me interested. When I got to her house, I could clearly see from the front of the house how filthy it all was. The thought of going inside started to become a regrettable decision. I mean, first encounters count, right? And I didn't mean to be so judgmental straight away, but looking at her house, it gave off the sort of impression that this was a person who didn't look after herself that much. I also talked with some of the locals, and what they told me about her didn't give off a good judgment of character. This woman was clearly out of touch with everything around her. At the same time, I wanted to know more about her, and me, being a nosy person, I couldn't help but wanting to know more about her. Clearly, something had happened in her life to make her live like this. I had already called her to make sure she was okay with me looking into her life, and she agreed to show me her way of life and to explain to me why she lives the way she does. The filth had a stench, and I was surprised that she hadn't died from any bacteria, because it seemed like the right environment for bacteria and viruses to survive. Her mental state was questionable, and she had old cassette players and VHS players all over the place, which don't really exist anymore. When I asked her why she lived like this, all that she could tell me was that as long as filth smelled like the way it should, it was all good. Everything was a mess, and I don't know why, but it kind of all got me being grateful for all the things I had in my life. On the other hand, I am sure someone with OCD would love to clean every speck of this place, and with everything out of order, it told me that her life must have been out of control. Things were broken, and she survived on government benefits and some inheritance from her parents. I could hear small things moving around, and they must have been rats or some other animal. It's weird how animals can survive in such mess. I guess their immune system must be better than ours. Actually, maybe this woman's immune system might be amazing at this point because she has survived this long in this mess. She told me about her mother and father. She was brought up in a 5-bedroom house. She also had 2 younger siblings, and after she had told me that she had siblings, I quickly assumed that her siblings had wanted nothing to do with her, which I was gravely wrong about. I tried asking more questions about her upbringing, but all she told me was, just go to the house of my childhood and notice how the filth gives off an amazing aroma. I then went to her childhood home, and I could clearly see that it had been abandoned for many years, and Mother Nature had clearly took over the house. It's sad how houses begin to go under after they had been abandoned, and it reminded me of the only thing I had remembered in my sociology class before I changed courses to journalism. It's people that give meaning to buildings and materialistic things, not the object itself. I kicked the door down as I could clearly see that the front door was past its prime. From what the house looked like, I had expected odour and stench to hit my nose, but instead I got to smell the most amazing aroma I had ever smelt in my life. I then started searching her childhood home for anything interesting to find. This woman's childhood home was exactly like her own house, and I don't know why, but I started to become irritated by this woman. In my generation, we are finding it difficult to even buy a home, and even if someone from my generation has managed to somehow buy a home, it's hard to keep it maintained. Yet this woman has managed to live in a big childhood home as well as having her own home, which clearly she had decided to neglect it. It's unfair, but I guess life is just unfair. It was all a mess, and I was beginning to find it all predictable with the neglect of having any care or pride in one's own life. Maybe her parents were abusive, and I wondered more about her siblings, because now I wanted to know why she was so alone in the world. We all need someone, no matter who we are, but then again, loneliness is a big problem in Western civilization, and we even have someone in the government whose main job is to tackle things like loneliness. Loneliness becomes more apparent as we get older, and this woman was old now, and with the inventions of social media and computer games, it's made loneliness even more stronger. The only good but odd thing about this woman's childhood home is the nice aroma and smell. I decided to follow the aroma because I couldn't resist it anymore. The aroma could be smelt the most from behind the sofas, and you know how in cartoons, when one cartoon character follows a pack of sweets, all lined up because it was being set up? That's what happened to me. When I looked behind the sofas, I gasped with horror and with utter disbelief, because I never thought that I would ever look upon something so disgusting and completely random. I saw 4 skeleton bones, still giving off a perfume-like scent. And this is not the type of smell you would think death could give off. I mean, with an amazing smell present, you would think something was full of life to give such a scent. I went back to see the woman, and I didn't call the police just yet because I wanted to know more, and I wanted her permission first of how to proceed with everything that I had just found. When I told this woman of filth, of what I had experienced in her childhood home, she started tearing up. Instead of calling the police, she just turned on the VHS player, and I started to watch something. Like an explanation video. At the same time, I also have to shamefully admit, finding all of this would have progressed my career in the journalism world. Even though I had just found something terrible, my career coming to my mind showed how I could have profited from this. Anyhow, the video told me more things about what was really going on. Hello, my name is Dr. Rogerson Peake. I have invented a pill that could make any dead person smell nice. When a body starts decomposing, it usually starts to smell. But with this pill, a decomposing body will be the most sweet-smelling thing you have ever smelt. The cassette player kept on playing. After watching the whole video, a few thoughts came to mind. Yes, the pill would give the dead person a bit more dignity by smelling nice, and it will also help people who deal with dead bodies, like in hospitals. But at the same time, this might be a great advantage for a murderer or serial killer. Imagine someone had murdered someone in your home, but the murdered person had this pill before being murdered. It could be some time before you notice something is off. Something smelling nice usually doesn't give an image of death or tell you that something is decomposing. It's always the nasty smell which makes us think something is off. Like when I was in this woman's childhood home, I honestly didn't think I would find something to be dead. Do you see how this might be an advantage for a serial killer or murderer? And I started to understand why this woman lived like the way she lived now for such a long time. I felt bad for being so judgmental or for thinking about my career gain of this whole story. I also started to glue together who those skeletons belonged to. From common sense, those skeletons behind the sofa in her childhood home must have been her 2 parents and 2 siblings. And I thought they had just abandoned her because of the way she had lived her life. Is someone trying to kill you? I asked this woman. My whole family took part in the experiment to eat the pill. We were struggling for money at the time, and they promised us that they would pay us lots of money to eat the pill. They weren't 100% honest with us, and none of us knew what the pill was made for exactly, she told me. She started crying a little bit, and the more I understood her story and why she lived the way she did, it was sad, just so sad. How we humans can be so unsympathetic or not care enough to understand someone but rather to judge and cast aside. After taking the pill, one midnight someone broke into my home and I was just a child back then, and this man had murdered my mother, father and both my siblings. I hid in a secret wall cupboard in my room which my father had built. For weeks this strange man who broke into my house observed my whole family's dead bodies. They all started to smell nice as they decomposed. I overheard his talk on the phone, and they wanted to use this pill in war and other scenarios where death is common, but they wanted to hide the deaths and murders. If something smells nice, no one would ever think something has died, she explained to me. She managed to escape when the strange man went for a smoke in her garden, and I couldn't believe what I had just been told. This story was not just a story, but probably one of the biggest scandals in the 21st century. I had to write about this and get this story out, and I phoned the police about the 4 skeletons in this woman's childhood home. Something had to be done, and we all know how shady the government can be and some of the things they can be capable of. This woman deserved justice. I hugged her and she pleaded me not to go to the police, but obviously I decided to go against her. I went back to my flat, and as soon as I entered, A beautiful scented aroma hit my nose, but I never sprayed anything inside my flat recently. I checked my whole flat and I found a dead body in my bathtub. The dead body had a note attached to it, which read, "Be wary of your steps, lad." I straight away drove to the woman's house, and this time, instead of the scent of filth hitting my nose, it was a perfume-like aroma, and I knew she had been murdered in her own living room. There was a note on her body which read, "We are watching, and the dead body in your flat has been taken now." And I couldn't believe it. I checked her childhood home, and everything inside had been taken, and no sign of police of any kind. They knew I would check on this woman after finding a dead body in her apartment, as well as her childhood home. I am being watched now. I love shopping. You might love shopping also. But what would you do if your shopping experience turned into a nightmare? I have a true story that was just that. It happened in a town in California called Oxnard. The town has a population of just over 200,000 people, and even though this town is the home of this horror story, it was ironically voted one of the safest cities in the United States of America back in 2013. The crime level is low and the income level is high. To add to that, it is a beautiful looking town. But no matter what town you go to, there are always places you'd want to watch out. There are good and bad people everywhere, I suppose. Back to what I told you at the start of this story, shopping. This particular shopping experience I am about to tell you about is far from your typical enjoyable experience. This is an account of a shopper at a huge mall, which is the mecca of American consumerism. The place to everyone go to get basically anything they desire, whether it be a book, clothes, food, or a toy. Toys will feature heavy in this story. Bear in mind, this particular store is meant to be haunted, but also bear in mind that not every store is haunted, of course. The ghost that people talk about in this store is of a little girl of Mexican-American descent. She is said to like to play in the toy aisle. There is nothing strange about that. What kid doesn't? But what is strange is she is a ghost. Employees and patrons have seen her roam around in the girls' toys section, but sometimes she can be seen playing with the trucks as well. She doesn't come across as sinister or dangerous to people who spot her. She is meant to usually greet them with a ghoulish smile. Why people say ghoulish is because her eyes are milk white, but her entire body is covered in blood. One customer said the first time they saw her, they just about died and went up to Jesus. They thought it was some kid who had hurt themselves. When the person saw the girl disappear in front of her very eyes, she knew she was a ghost. But the girl never talks. Some people believe that the girl was murdered years and years ago in the field where the huge mole now stands. That is a rumour which was made in the circle of people that came across the girl. Whether it is true or not, they don't know. The people who see the girl are often greeted by her smile. One person who has seen the girl said it stands to reason that if she has been haunting that area for all these years, forever trapped in the spirit and mentality of a little girl, she would find the sudden appearance of a bunch of toys around her to be a golden opportunity. As horrific as this story is, no one has exactly any cause to fear the ghost. The main reason for people being so disturbed is the sheer volume of blood on her is enough to freak people out. A former employee has said, "We just let her be mostly. She doesn't hurt anyone, at least so far, and there's really not much we could do about her if we wanted to. It's sad, you know, that little girl playing all alone in there in the toys with no friends or family to be with her. So yeah, we just let her be, and we hope that she never decides that she doesn't like us anymore." I used to love going to my local cinema, but I was so upset when I learned it was closing down. Just a few days before the closing date, I was so happy to learn that because of such high numbers of people going to the cinema, it decided to stay open. I was a very loyal customer, so one day I received a scroll like the Roman times, and written on it was, "We are happy to announce to you that you, being a loyal customer, we invite you to a showing of a very special movie. Please note that you are only permitted and no other person. Enjoy the movie." I was so excited. A few weeks ago I thought the cinema was closing. Now it's thriving, and there's queues out the door. On top of that, I just got an invitation to a really cool movie. I didn't know what it was. It was a secret until it showed, but I felt really appreciated being given the invitation. The movie was on Halloween night. I had planned to go to a party, but I no way could pass up on this offer. I arrived at the cinema at 7:30 on Halloween night, expecting a huge queue as always. But I was very surprised when there was no one in the queue, just one security man on the door who asked to see my invitation, and a girl inside at the box office. She smiled at me and said, "Good evening, sir. May I see your invitation?" I showed her the scroll, and she gestured with her hand towards screen 1 and said, "Screen 1, sir, enjoy the movie." I thanked her and excitedly went into the cinema. I looked around, and to my astonishment, there was no one else in the cinema, just empty seats. The last few weeks, there wasn't an empty seat in the place. I wondered should I go out to buy some popcorn, but just relaxed in my seat first. The door opened and another person came in. I don't know why, but I felt strange being in the cinema alone with this guy. There was some kind of strange negative energy of him. He walked up to the front seat of the cinema. I was down the back. The lights went off and a message appeared on the screen. It read, "We have invited you to this very special movie to show our appreciation for your help in helping this cinema thrive." All of a sudden, the guy ran up to me and I got such a fright. But it was just me being paranoid, as he was just putting something in the bin behind me. Then he walked back to the front and sat down again. The title of the movie appeared on the screen. It read Locked In. I've never heard of this movie before and wondered what was it about. Suddenly the guy got up again and ran back, but luckily he passed me. I was relieved, until I realised he was standing by the door. I wondered what was he doing. Maybe he just didn't want to miss the start of the movie and was going to buy some popcorn. But then fear rose up inside me and my heart pounded in my chest. I could hear the thumping in my ears. He put a lock on the door, locking it. I thought of the name of the movie, Locked In. I didn't know what else to say but ask him what was going on. He looked at me with an evil, sinister stare. Relax. You were one of the main reasons this cinema is thriving now. I didn't understand until the movie started playing. It was the owner of the cinema on the screen. It was all beginning to get scarier and scarier. He started to speak. Welcome to the cinema, my good friend. Just a few short weeks ago, we were to close down because we weren't getting enough business. As you can see, the last few weeks we are thriving, and that is down to one thing. I practice black magic, you see. I had an amazing chance at saving this cinema, so I welcomed it with open arms. I made a pact with the devil. All he asked was one sacrifice of a very, very loyal customer every Halloween. And as long as I do this, well then, this cinema will have a roaring trade. I couldn't believe what I was seeing and hearing. The man behind me got out a huge knife and shouted, "Hail Satan!" I ran down to the fire exit, hoping it would be open, and thankfully it was. I ran straight to the police station and told them everything, but they didn't believe me, and I worry what will happen next Halloween. I haven't and wouldn't darken the door of that cinema ever again. Tony was a writer of crime fiction and horror. He was writing his first draft, and he wanted peace and quiet, so he rented out a quiet cabin in the woods for 6 months. His story was based in a cabin in the woods, so he thought it only right that he wrote at least his first draft in the cabin. Things began to get very weird. He was just after finishing writing his first chapter, which was about a sheriff calling to ask about any teenagers who might have passed through, as they were terrorizing the neighbors. There was nothing that weird about him writing it at first. It was what happened afterwards really took Tony by surprise. Within 5 minutes of the chapter being written, there was a knock on the door, and the sheriff was standing outside, asking did Tony see any teenagers pass through, as they were causing trouble down in the town. Tony was shocked and told him no, he didn't. He felt like telling him about what he had just wrote, but he just told him he was writing a novel and left it at that. The sheriff smiled at him and said, "That sounds really great, sir. Good luck with your novel. And remember, it's the start and the ending that's most important." He gave a smile and walked away. Tony felt a weird energy come off the sheriff as he walked away. The next couple of months, didn't have any other weird coincidences, and Tony was starting his last chapter where a guy living in a cabin gets killed by a crazy killer. Tony had just finished the last line, which was, the killer had put a knife to the man's throat and slit it open. A few minutes later, Tony heard footsteps behind him. He got a start when he saw the sheriff standing right in front of him holding a knife, and he just stared at Tony, saying, "Remember I told you, it's the start and ending that's most important." Tony thought of the last line of his book and realised this sheriff knew what his first chapter was about, and he must have known what his last one was about, and he was about to kill him. Now his words about the beginning and ending made sense. As the man swung the knife for Tony, he ducked and grabbed the knife and stabbed the man who he had paid to give him 2 visits at the cabin. First visit to coincide exactly at the time Tony finished his first chapter, and the second visit coinciding with him finishing his last chapter. Tony smiled looking at the man in a pool of blood, wondering what the man had actually thought of him paying him $500 to call and do his first few lines, and then the grand finale a couple of months later with a knife. Tony wondered had the man any clue or any suspicion he would ever grab the knife off him and kill him with it. Tony was pleased with his work, always believing truth is always stranger than fiction. Mary and Jeffrey had a teenage daughter called Susie. They were just your regular American family until one night the unspeakable happened. In the middle of an argument, Susie was hit so hard from her father she fell against the kitchen worktop and died soon after. They rang the police right away and explained everything, and Jeffrey was let off after a long drawn-out trial. Mary and Jeffrey were carrying the burden for 5 years when everything came crashing down on them with one phone call. Mary had answered the phone and first thought it was a sick prank, but after asking her a few questions, she knew they were answers only her daughter would know. It was her daughter on the phone. One question was, who did she sneak out the night before to meet? And the answer was her best friend Olivia. Those details weren't in the press. Susie asked her mum to get her dad and put him on the phone, and he couldn't believe what he was hearing. It was his daughter that had died 5 years ago. Susie had told them to go down to the well at the bottom of the garden to meet her. Both Susie's parents felt like they were having some sort of nightmare. It was dark and they both walked down to the end of the garden. There was no one there. Suddenly they heard Susie's voice and could see a shadow of her in front of them. As she stepped towards them, they could make out it wasn't Susie, but her best friend Olivia. They both looked at her wondering what was happening. Olivia lifted up a shovel and said, "Ye really thought I was your daughter, the daughter ye killed just because of her sneaking out to meet me the night before." Mary lifted up her hands in fear and shouted, "No, Olivia, it was an accident. Susie fell and hit her head." Olivia shouted, "Do you realise it's because of your husband's anger that I am feeling guilty every single night and have nightmares?" With that, she hit Mary, then Jeffrey, over the head with the shovel and threw them both into the well. That night was the first night in a few months that she didn't have the recurring dream of Susie asking her to do what she had done. My name is Lisa, and I remember growing up, my grandmother used to always tell me stories about the Banshee, which was a well-known Irish legend. The Banshee is known to keen outside a window if there is going to be a death in the family, whether it's near or far. I was arguing one night with my mother as she wouldn't allow me out to a party. I was furious as my older sister was allowed to go to the party. My mom's reason for not allowing me was because I failed an exam. How lame! I ran to my room and slammed the door and started sulking. My room was ground level as there was no stairs in our house. I was lying on my bed checking through social media on my phone, sure that I'd be driven mad with my friends' updates of how amazing the party is. Suddenly, I heard something strange coming from my window. I heard a tapping sound, and I got a start when I heard what seemed like a woman keening, which I remember my grandmother telling me that is exactly what banshees do. I walked up slowly and cautiously to my window and jumped with fright as an old withered-looking woman stared right at me, shouting, "Help me, sweet girl, I am very cold and I was in a car accident." I didn't believe the woman, but I did have a tiny doubt she might be telling the truth. Was I being paranoid over all my grandmother's stories? Then suddenly, I jumped back as the woman banged at the glass and shouted hysterically, "Let me in, you bitch! Let me in!" I couldn't bear looking at her eyes any longer as I ran into the kitchen and shouted to my mom, "Call the police!" I saw my mom on her phone crying. I asked did she see the woman, but my mom didn't answer. She just kept crying. A few minutes later, my mom explained to me that it was the police were on the phone, breaking the news to her that my sister had been killed in a car crash on her way to the party. Some nights, I think I hear tapping on my window, and sometimes I even wake up in a sweat thinking I can hear the Banshee keening. I am a detective for 10 years. I am assigned to help the FBI with the most brutal cases they have to offer. It affects my everyday life and relationships. I might have to cancel a date with my wife, or I can't make my son's football game. And to give you an idea of the situation, I just missed my daughter's graduation last week. I am chasing probably one of the worst type of serial killers America has ever seen. His name is Brian Wilson, but goes by the name of the Phantom Killer. He has the name because no one knows what he actually looks like these days. You might wonder what I meant by that, but Brian has an incredible way of disguising his appearance using latex and special effects makeup. He would have no problem throwing together a female face if he liked. So that is the worst thing about him, other than the brutal way he murders his victims. The FBI, police, and myself have no idea what he looks like. I had to make my wife and kids' safety my number one priority. I never take any precautions with Brian, so had a cop car to pick them up and bring them to a safe house because something very big is about to go down. You will learn what it is in a few moments. I waited until the cop car pulled up and an African American cop pulled down his window and said, "Hey there, sir. I'll have your wife and kids put in the address you were given and give you a call when we are there." I thanked the officer and walked back into my house to get ready for a busy night. I think I might have hit a break though, as Brian, one of the most notorious killers America has ever seen, had emailed a guy who does a hugely successful podcast and offered him an interview. The rules were his though, which were 1. No cops or anyone gets told until the interview is over. 2. It won't be over Skype or the phone, etc. It would have to be face to face. 3. It would have to be in a place chosen by Brian. The podcast guy goes by the name of Fred Jackson. His podcast is a true crime podcast called Fred's True Crime Podcast. He averages about 1 million listeners a week. He is hot property, which is mostly the reason Brian chose him to be interviewed. I wondered though, what was behind this podcast? What had Brian in mind? I guessed no doubt he had evil intentions. Or else maybe he was just feeding his ego, which was evil of course because his ego was built on leaving trails of blood behind. Fred of course told me about this podcast interview, and we discussed it with the police and several FBI agents. This guy wasn't just any ordinary fugitive. He is probably one, if not the most dangerous fugitives in the United States of America. We gave Fred a tracking device, and over many different ideas thrown around, we came to the conclusion the best place he could have his tracking device was inside the sole of his shoe. Me and several others will have a live GPS tracking device, knowing where he is exactly. We knew that we could not be seen, or it would be all over for Fred. When we were tailing him, we were using a public bus we got a loan of with actors and actresses in it. We also didn't want them in danger, so still made the driver know he had to stay at least 10 places behind Fred, as Brian more than likely would be with him in the car when we made the move. Fred got a time and place, 10 p.m. behind an old warehouse just out of town. We obviously knew the bus couldn't drive in there, so we had people on foot hiding, ready for them since 7 p.m, carefully making sure their presence wasn't known. I was hidden behind a tree, looking directly at the back of the warehouse, when, as expected, on the dot of 10, I saw Fred's car arrive. He got out and checked his watch, making sure he was on time. I waited in anticipation. there was a shout from behind a barrel at the side of the warehouse. "Hey there, Fred! Thanks for this big break, giving me some time on your famous murder radio show." What happened next, I couldn't believe my eyes. Fear gathered up in my chest, and my heart beat so fast I could hear it thumping in my ears. When the figure of Brian came into view, I could see that he was the same African American man that took my wife and kids to the safe house. I felt fear take over me with the realization that Brian's latest disguise and prosthetic face was of an African American man that claimed to be a cop to me just today. Brian knew that my wife and kids were meant to be taken to a safe house. But wherever they are now, Brian, the Phantom Killer, has them. And that's if they're still even alive. I was frozen in fear for a few seconds, knowing that the Phantom Killer had my wife and kids somewhere. But I knew that I couldn't mess this up now. I had to think fast what to do. I made the fast decision to lie low, knowing Brian's intelligence. He probably knows I'm watching. Fred approached Brian slowly and carefully and asked, "So, is this what you really look like, or is it just another one of your disguises?" Brian replied, "Nah, I just wanted to know what it's like to be a cop, so I decided to be a cop. It was very convenient when I took Mr. Sam Waters' wife and kids to a safe house." Fred held up his hands. "I'm not armed, and I'm not wired, so why don't we just get this podcast over with?" Brian looked suspiciously at Fred. Now, Freddy boy, what's the big rush? Don't you remember I said they were my rules?" Fred was about to reply when Brian pulled out a gun and faced it right at him. Fred screamed, but didn't want to let Brian know there were cops watching, or he would definitely pull the trigger. Brian pulled the gun back and started laughing at Fred. Brian said in a mocking way, "Geez, Freddy boy, you sure are uptight. How am I meant to get you to interview me if I blow your head off?" I was watching this all unfold, knowing that I had to do something. I knew that Brian was one of the most intelligent killers in America, and he would have definitely thought it through, me running out to him right now, so I stayed behind the tree. Brian said, "Let's go into the warehouse, shall we?" Fred said, "Sure, but I need to get my mic and stuff out of the car." Brian gave him a suspicious look again and said, "Well, it looks like I better help you then." Fred got his recording equipment out of his car and they both walked into the warehouse. Sam knew he had to make a move now and also knew he had to get Brian alive, or he might never find out where his kids and wife are. He slowly went into the warehouse. Within a few seconds, there was a huge explosion. The whole building was rigged with C4 explosives, and it went up in a matter of seconds. The fire was dancing high in the air as the whole building was burning intensely. The cops all came out of their hiding places and knew that Sam, Brian, and Fred were undoubtedly burned alive. The local sheriff said, "Son of a bitch, he wanted to kill himself and kill his biggest hunter." The cops had to stand back from the building and wait for the firefighters to arrive, knowing no one could have survived that explosion, let alone being in that fire. The smoke alone would kill anyone. Later that night, the local sheriff held a press conference. Dear men and women and children of America, it is with my sadness and regret that one of the finest detectives I've ever worked with has sadly lost his life in a deadly fire, along with podcast personality Fred Jackson and serial killer Brian Wilson, otherwise known as the Phantom Killer. It is with regret that I can also inform you, just minutes before the killer killed himself in a rigged explosion to end his life and the others, he had confessed to taking the identity of a police officer and took Sam Waters' wife and children, which meant even though we had him in clear target to shoot, we couldn't afford to kill him, or we might never find out where he has Mr. Waters' wife and kids. We will work tirelessly to find out exactly where they are and keep you updated. The Phantom Killer might now be gone, but he made sure to get revenge in the biggest way by taking with him Sam, a detective that was so close to finally capturing him. R.I.P. to Sam and Fred. As Sam Waters was following Brian Wilson and the Phantom Killer into the warehouse, the explosion was deafening, and within seconds the whole building was engulfed in flames. Brian smiled as he fell through a trapdoor, safely sliding to safety down into an underground bunker he had spent months on end building. He knew it would withstand the blast. As he fell into the bunker, he quickly rolled out of the way as Fred Jackson came rolling out next. Fred was dazed while Brian had his eyes fixed to a chute in front of him where Sam Wilson dropped out of the chute within seconds. Brian laughed and said, "Hey, rough landing, but hey, it's better than being blown to smithereens by explosives. Hey, Sammy boy?" Sam was shaking in fear, but a part of him was relieved he wasn't killed in the explosion. Brian held the gun to them and said, "Okay, here is the part where you strip your clothes and shoes off completely. I need to make sure there's no tracking devices." It just struck Brian that everything he was saying would be heard if they were wearing a listening device. He kicked himself for that flaw in his otherwise ingenious plan. Both Sam and Fred stripped completely, and Brian walked over and handcuffed them both, and tied their legs to a bar so they couldn't escape, as he checked their clothes for any devices. He smiled when he discovered there were none. After a thorough search, he threw the clothes back to them and uncuffed them and told them they could get dressed. Up on the ground outside the burning building, the sheriff said to one of his officers, "Do you know what's funny about this whole thing?" The officer replied, "What, sir?" "I am looking at that tracking device put in the shoe, and that thing is in one place, not moving, but just in one place. But if that was in that fire, wouldn't the signal be lost?" The sheriff looked at the officer. "Are you following me, boy?" He replied, "Yes, sir. Do you think somehow they're still alive?" The sheriff said, "Let's hope so." It was like an oven with the heat in the bunker and the burning flames above them, but yet they were free from danger. Brian smiled at both men and said, "Well, do ye not give me credit for my ingenious plan? By the way, I suppose, Sam, you're wondering where your wife and kids are. Would you believe they're just across in the other room? But not to raise your hopes, they will not be able to survive much longer, as no one is going to know they're down here. I have enjoyed our friendship, Sammy boy. I must say, I kind of enjoyed the cat and mouse chase we were playing all over the years. But I'm afraid, my friend, there comes a time all good things come to an end, and this, my friend, is the end for you." Brian looked over at Fred and said, "And you, Freddy boy, you might wonder why you got involved in all this. Well, you see, you joined yourself, really, by accepting my interview. I was going to do a live podcast and then have you killed, but I said, this will be better. Everyone is going to think that I am gone, killed, gone from this god-forsaken world. But you see, the truth is, I will be walking out that tunnel I took months building, and I will be a free man, thankfully. I won't have to keep watching over my back all the time and being like a bloody special effects makeup artist." Sam shouted, "Let my wife and kids go, you sick bastard!" Brian pointed his gun at Sam's head and said, "No, you see, that wouldn't end well for me, would it?" Sam knew his end was coming, and suddenly there was a gunshot. Sam fell to the ground. Fred screamed, looking at Sam fall hard on the ground. He then saw Brian fall to the ground. Sam's eyes opened. He realized somehow he was alive, and his vision cleared. As he looked up, he could see the sheriff above him. The sheriff said, "Are you alright, son? Are ye guys okay?" Sam smiled and said, "I had seen better days." Then he lifted his finger and pointed towards the direction Brian told them he had his wife and kids held captive. The sheriff looked over at Fred. "Well, son, you sure will have a lot to talk about on your next podcast." Fred smiled and said, "What made ye guys guess we weren't killed in that explosion?" The sheriff pointed to Fred's shoe and said, "The answer is in your shoe." Fred thought, of course, the tracking device, and thanked God Brian didn't check his shoe better. A few days later, Sam Waters, his wife and kids were guests on Fred's podcast show, and the listenership ratings went through the roof, giving Fred's True Crime podcast the highest rating ever for his show. My name is William. I was about to marry the girl of my dreams when I did something stupid. I started having an affair, and months before the wedding, my girlfriend Sharon found out and wanted me to marry her still. But the problem was, it wasn't that she forgave me. She was acting very erratic and possessive. She used to ask me to invite the lady I was having the affair with to the house, and to me tell her how much my girlfriend meant to me. And Sharon and I were getting married. It was a Friday night I heard the news that changed everything. Just weeks before my wedding, Sharon got killed in a car accident. I regretted the affair so much after having to identify Sharon at the morgue. I should have gave her all my world and married her, I know that. But a year later, besides all that, me and the girl I was having the affair with, who was called Lauren, were falling deeper and deeper in love. So much we got married that year. I felt so happy marrying her, but I felt something very wrong. It wasn't guilt, it was just a feeling Sharon was watching over me, livid with jealousy. I brushed the feelings to the side. The day of the wedding, I was so busy and excited, all those weird feelings were gone. Until my friends took a photo of me and my newly married wife together. Afterwards, they all just stared weirdly at their phones. Everyone was talking to each other. I wondered why. My friend showed me her phone, and there, in the photo of me and Lauren, was my ex-girlfriend Sharon behind us, who I knew must have been her ghost. I gasped, and as I did, I heard everyone screaming. We all ran out of the church as the whole church went up in flames. Luckily, we all escaped without a scratch. But there isn't a day passes by something strange doesn't happen, like I hear knocking at my door, or I feel a hand on my shoulder, and I dread something very big is going to happen, like our house is going to go up in flames like the church. I do not know what is going to happen next because of the angry, out-of-control ghost of my dead ex-girlfriend, Sharon. Me and my wife are just an ordinary couple living on a pumpkin farm, trying to make a living. There was an awful smell from a certain part of the farm. It seemed to come from a tree near the pumpkins. We got experts in to check it out, and they couldn't find anything wrong with the tree. We had enough on our plate with trying to make money. We only opened the farm today for selling pumpkins for Halloween and couldn't afford any foul smells, turning off customers. As the smell kept coming from the tree, I decided to dig it up from its roots, hoping that would get rid of the smell. I suddenly screamed when I came across a dead body. On closer inspection, it looked like a woman was decomposing for a while. It turned out she was a homeless woman. The sheriff and police department are good friends with me, so changed the details of where the body was found to a field outside my farm. That way, it wouldn't affect the pumpkin business we have. No one would want to buy a pumpkin from the same field a corpse had been decomposing. It was a real-life nightmare that a poor, hungry, homeless woman who survived on pumpkins and lived in a tree died out here. Lots of pumpkins sold that weekend. The nightmare continued when I got a call from the sheriff. He said, "Stop selling those pumpkins." The results came back, and that woman's autopsy, it was the pumpkins that killed her. They were laced with arsenic. Someone has poisoned all your pumpkins. I froze, thinking how many people could have possibly made pumpkin pie or soup etc. early. If they did, they won't live to see Halloween. Breaking news. In a small town in Nebraska called Newtown, there have been dozens of people fell ill and several fatalities that are due to be linked to this pumpkin farm. The biggest twist to this story is that there was a body of a dead homeless woman found a few days before, and it was said to the media from the police and the town's sheriff that the woman was found in another field nearby. However, the pumpkins in this very farm are poisoned, so we are issuing a warning to anyone who has bought them here. Please dispose of them and do not eat them as they are poisonous. Don't even use them as a jack-o'-lantern. We will have more breaking news at the top of the hour. Peter Tracy, Channel 6 News, Newtown, Nebraska. The police never did find out who put arsenic in the pumpkins. But very strange things happened around the farm. I have witnessed tractors driving by themselves, and doors opening, and weird noises at night. Me and my wife are convinced that what happened in our pumpkin farm is something paranormal. You know, getting a full 1 hour break at work should be easily given to all workers, but managers and owners seem to find ways around it. In every workplace I have been employed at, all my breaks have been disturbed, or even worse, I didn't get to have a full 1 hour break. Especially in times of economic downturn, it's always that guy at the bottom who gets the worst deal out of it all. We all must work more longer and have less breaks to create more profits for the owners. Only by the luck of the gods, which only happen ever so occasionally, will you get to have an undisturbed 1 hour break. A couple of months ago, I started applying for new jobs and got a new job straight away, which promised to give workers fair treatment. By fair treatment, they meant getting a full 1 hour break and giving you all the annual holidays that workers deserved, which was set up by the unions. When I spoke to the managers during my interview, they seemed nice and down to earth. All my past managers seemed bitter and grumpy, but these lot seemed to have a different outlook on things. The job role title was called a concierge for a residential building. The residential building was a brand spanking new one, and a lot of new building were being built to tackle the housing crisis. Anyhow, I fitted right into the job, and on my first day everything was going smoothly. On my first day, my manager told me that I don't decide when to go on my break, but my break times come to me. I honestly didn't know what my manager meant by this, but I was kind of busy to know more at the time. When I got inside the elevator to go up to the 9th floor, I couldn't believe it when the elevator had stopped working and was stuck on the 4th floor due to some mechanical issue. The company that built the elevators inside the residential building contacted me through the elevator. I was stuck inside and told me that a mechanic was on his way in an hour. Then my manager phoned me and he told me that he knew that the lift had broken down and knew that it would take the mechanic an hour to get here. My manager also told me that being stuck inside the elevator for an hour was my real break. Like my manager had told me before, that I don't get to decide when to have my break, but break times choose when to come to me, like being stuck inside an elevator. After the mechanic finally came and fixed the elevator, after an hour, I had a word with my manager. He thought nothing of it and didn't really care for what I had to say because I managed to have a full 1 hour uninterrupted break inside a broken lift. Then another time, I became stuck inside the stairs and the doors on the stairs aren't locked by a key but a fob system, so tenants need a fob card to get in and out of the stairs, just like how they need to get into the building. Basically, the fob card system had gone weird and all the doors which were connected to the system were all on lockdown. I had decided to use the stairs because I was scared of using an elevator after it had broken down, but now I was stuck inside the stairs and my fob card wouldn't work and let me out into the corridors of the building. My manager phoned me and told me that he knew the fob card system was down for an hour, and that hour being stuck inside the stairs was my official break. At that moment, I told myself that I was going to find another job because this was just crazy. I had never worked in a place where break times chose where and when a person gets to have a break. There was one time where I thought I wasn't going to get a break because nothing was breaking down or becoming faulty and trapping me inside a certain place in the building for an hour. For the first time in my life, I was happy and glad not to be getting a break. But when my shift was over and I got into my car, the car gate was down and wouldn't open for an hour. I was stuck inside the car park, which belonged to the building, and workers weren't allowed to park inside the car park, and my manager phoned me. He told me off for parking inside the car park, which only tenants could park in, and told me that it would take an hour for the mechanic to come and fix the car gate. That hour would be my break, even though my shift had finished and there was nothing else I could do but just wait it out. I couldn't find any new jobs because jobs were really drying up in my area. Now I had put in a month's holiday, which I needed, and it had been accepted. I decided that the whole of September would be my holiday, but on the last day of August, as I got into an elevator, because I needed to get to the top floor, because something had happened on the 9th floor, the elevators stopped working again on the 5th floor, and I was trapped once again. An automatic call-out from the computer inside the elevator made to the company that built the elevators inside the building, but they had bad news, and they told me that they wouldn't have any available mechanic for a whole month. Then my manager phoned me and told me that the month spent inside the elevator was to be my holiday, because not only do your breaks choose where and when you get to have a break, but even your holidays choose where and when you spend your holiday. I am still stuck inside the elevator, and I am counting the days when this month will end. Also, a hatchet opens every 5 hours, and food is given to me, and I have no idea how that works. After I get out of here, probably smelling of body odor, I am not working here anymore. We are all chasing for more freedom, and I mean every living being, big or small, is constantly looking to escape. Humanity has come a long way with the amount of freedom and rights that people have. A couple of years ago, slavery was the norm, and people were divided by the colour of their skin. Gender equality has come a long way as well, because it wasn't so long ago that women were restricted to being only mothers. So many famous male and female activists have fought for freedom for all human beings and are now being looked up to as heroes. Anything can be a prison though, and it could be a job you hate or being stuck in a relationship that is going nowhere. The need to be free from those types of prisons are just as strong as any other yearning for escape. Something always comes to trap us, and the fight to escape entrapments, however big or small, is the curse for being alive. People addicted to drugs used drugs to help them escape from one hellish lifestyle, only to be reliant on their drug to the point that it becomes their new prison. They traded in one prison for another. The way addicts escape addiction is through rehab and the use of other medicines as their ticket to freedom. The need to get out of things is in all of us, but with so many rights protecting us and the freedom to love, travel and choose whatever takes our fancy, I must ask the question as to why people are so miserable, considering everything that we have and the privileges our era has given us. Unlike in past eras, we sappy group of people living in the best of times, depression is prevalent throughout the globe, and suicide is common
even though anyone from the past would think we are living in the golden age of human civilization. I always used to think that maybe we are all ungrateful, but then opinions always change, like the seasons throughout the year. My daughter was looking for freedom, and she has always been depressed. Ever since she was a little tiny girl, she hated hanging around with other kids and was a very reserved child.
The other girls naturally took to picking on her because my daughter was so different, and it was obvious that the kids her age would not take to her so easily. I have had to change her school multiple times now. Now I have found a school where she can be herself. It's strange how children bully each other, as if they do not realise that what they say and do to each other has real effects on the other human. I guess maturing takes time. I tried to show my daughter the different types of hobbies she could get into, but she just doesn't seem to like anything, and everything just depresses her. I have spent quite a bit of money trying to get the best psychologist to deal with my daughter, but in the end, medication is all that we are given. I dreamt that one day my daughter would play with other girls and enjoy all of the things that life has given us. Then one day I awoke to my daughter laughing and chatting to someone outside our house, and as I looked outside, I couldn't believe that my daughter was socializing with someone. It was a woman I had never seen before, but my daughter seemed to connect with her somehow, and I was just so happy for her. When I tried to introduce myself to the woman talking with my daughter, she just simply walked away. My daughter had a smile on her face like she felt relieved, and I asked her about the woman she was talking to, but my daughter just smiled and said, "Just a generous woman." Just like that, I started seeing my daughter hanging about with this woman. I didn't try and intervene because for the first time my daughter looked so comfortable in her own skin. At the same time, an adult woman hanging around my daughter of high school age did always concern me. My daughter was smiling though, and I guess I had intentions of inviting this woman over to my house to try to get to know her. I mean, I have tried many specialists to get through to my daughter, and I wanted to know how she did it. My wife was a little jealous and felt like she was a failure because she couldn't connect with her daughter. When my daughter went to school, she didn't want a lift. I received a knock on the door. There were two smartly dressed guys who were from the British Secret Services, and they had something serious to tell me. They showed pictures of the woman who my daughter had taken a liking to, and told me that this woman had died in World War II. They showed us her documents and everything about her life and where she was buried, and the obvious questions were asked, but the answers were not simple to understand. "It's not the dead or anything supernatural," the first guy told me. "Do you believe in aliens?" the other one asked. "Aliens?" I replied. "We are not so sure how they came to our planet, but these aliens travel and feed off freedom. Our race is freer than ever before, and so these aliens can travel and feed so more than they could before," the first guy told me. "They use dead people as well to move around, as dead people are considered by them to be free," the second guy told me. I couldn't believe any of this, and I told them to go away, even when they showed me proof that they did truly work in the National Secret Service. I couldn't take any more of it. They gave me their card, and I was told to call them if anything started to escalate. As soon as my daughter came home, I banned her from ever seeing that strange woman ever again. My daughter started to cry and moan that it wasn't fair and that she really liked the woman. When I followed her into her bedroom crying and wailing, we were both in shock when that strange woman was suddenly in her room. My daughter screamed in terror, and I was just trying to catch my breath out of sheer shock that the woman who my daughter knew now looked like a hideous creature. The woman held out her arm towards my daughter, and even though she was talking softly, it echoed throughout the house. Do you want to be free from all of this, Julia? Come with us, and we will give you the ultimate freedom, the woman told my daughter. I then noticed that my daughter seemed to be in some kind of trance. Her smile was weak, and I grabbed hold of her to stop her from moving into the creature's arms. All my daughter could say was, I want to be free from all of this and everything else. Then, by some miracle, the two guys from the Secret Services had been keeping an eye on our family, and they rushed into my house as they entered the room. All three of us dragged my daughter from her bedroom. I locked my daughter's bedroom with the thing still trapped inside. As I did this, my daughter was in the living room. She was back to being shocked and scared. I finally believed the two Secret Service guys, and they explained more to me about the odd aliens from outer space. They said to me, these aliens don't just travel and feed off freedom, but they are made of it. This also answered my question as to why depression and suicide is so prevalent in the golden era of having such high levels of freedom and rights. Depression is just one of the effects caused by the aliens who chase after freedom and make us kill ourselves, because they cause so much emotional and psychological pain that their victim only wants to be free from it all. I wanted to take my daughter to the hospital, but the two Secret Service guys told me that the hospital wouldn't help. They warned me that there is only one thing that I could do. They told me that because the aliens feed off freedom and can't travel through freedom, I had to start reducing my daughter's freedoms. They explained that even some of her rights as a human being would have to be limited. That way, it would be hard for the aliens to get to her. The two Secret Service guys spoke to their manager. As they explained this to me, they started to shuffle some paperwork and explained to me that my daughter had to start doing hard labour for no money. She would be prevented from going out or eating something when she felt like it. I went along with it because all I wanted was for my daughter to be safe. My wife was utterly distraught about the whole thing, and she couldn't stop thinking about my daughter's future. She was concerned about what my daughter could do if her rights and freedoms are limited. We were told that some people do survive, but some don't. We were warned that the aliens are always trying to find ways to get to their victim. I had to take my daughter out of school and make her sleep down in the cellar and lock the cellar door. All of this made it look like our daughter was a slave. However, it did work, as the woman in her bedroom had disappeared. I would sometimes see the woman either in the market or some other place outside the home. Either way, she was far away from my family. At a later date, I had to force my daughter to go to work in a meat factory, where the owner was working for the Secret Services. The department in charge of the meat factory is a special secret government service department which deals with aliens and other creatures alike. The department have made all sorts of factories as a way of rehabilitation for people like my daughter whose freedom and rights had to be taken away due to the aliens. It was horrible, and listening to her cry, it also wasn't nice to smell her after a hard day's work. My daughter begged me to give her life back, but I couldn't, as I knew what would happen to her if I did. All of my daughter's basic rights and freedom now taken away, but she was safe for a while, which only lasted for a couple of months. One day I heard my daughter screaming down in the cellar. As I rushed down, I saw that my daughter was in front of that woman again, and she was trying to tempt my daughter into taking freedom. I saw my daughter going back into a trance again, and her smile was so weak and feeble I felt like she was drugged or something. I ran down the stairs and dragged my daughter away from the alien. As I did, it gave out a screech, and a couple of more Secret Service guys came to our rescue. Our house was being watched 24/7 at that point, and I locked the cellar door. After the door was locked, I looked in confusion at the two men who ordered me to take away my daughter's freedom and rights. I was confused because their plan hadn't worked as they'd promised. Then one of them looked at me with a serious, worried look and said, "We have to go deeper and take more rights from your daughter. This time we will take her ability to choose who she can have sex with." I practically puked when I heard that, and I shouted, "You want to take away the freedom of choice of who my daughter gets to have sex with? She is still at school." "We may not have a choice here, and the alien still managed to get to your daughter because she still had some freedom left, which was sexual freedom. I didn't think we would have to go that far, but this creature is determined to get to your daughter," the second Secret Service man told me. Although it sounded disgusting, they had a point. However, I wasn't going to let my daughter become some sex slave, and nor was my wife prepared to see our daughter become a sex slave. Both my wife and I decided to give our daughter away to the creature down in the cellar. As I held my daughter in my arms with my wife behind me crying her eyes out, I looked at the alien, and it looked at my daughter. My daughter smiled again. I loved seeing her smile like that. I realized then that I couldn't bear seeing her as some slave anymore. My daughter said to the alien, "I want freedom. I want to escape." And the alien touched my daughter, and she died in my arms. The alien looked at me and said, "Your daughter is now free from everything that has caused her so much agony." The next couple of years were hard. The relationship between my wife and me was not the same anymore, as we would both constantly argue and blame each other. It was not until recently we both saw our daughter again. We would see her in random places, which brought hope to us both. And one day she appeared in our house, and my wife and I were overjoyed. Our daughter was now offering me and my wife freedom. She is offering us freedom from the pain that life can give to parents whose child has died. Both of us know what we want. My wife was the willing participant, and now I have to try and protect her from the same fate my daughter had experienced. My cousin would always tell us a creepy story that happened to him when he was 9. Monday 2009, my cousin, let's call him Jason, a smart 9-year-old who would play on his PS2 every day when he comes from school. On Monday 2009, he received an iPhone
The next day, he took it to school to show it off to his classmates. One day, while he was texting one of his friends, he received a message from an unknown number. The text was 666, and it had a really creepy image of what looked like a demon. He thought it was some troll messing with him, so he ignored it. But the next day at night, he received the same message and picture. He was freaked out. A few minutes later, the same unknown number called him. All he could hear was someone whispering an address. My cousin blocked the unknown number. A month later, he saw on the news a boy who was brutally murdered in the same address the unknown number was talking about. He thanked God for giving him a bad feeling and not going to that weird address, because if he went, he'd become dead like the dead boy. Me and my wife were so happy for so many years. We had so much fun and enjoyed life to the full. But then things started getting bad when she started having hallucinations. And as they escalated, I couldn't take it anymore. We both finally agreed she would seek help. She visited a psychologist, but it did no help. She used to argue with me about the littlest things. When we finally got to bed, it wasn't lovemaking we would do. She would just turn her back on me and sob and cry and sob and cry all night. Eventually, she moved into the room next door. I could still hear her cry all night. A few months later, I couldn't take it anymore. I put on my jacket and got into my car with a shovel and drove to the cemetery. I got out and walked into the cemetery and started digging. I could hear her cries over and over while I was digging. When I reached the coffin, the cries got louder and louder. I screamed and shouted, "Stop crying," as I opened the coffin. And there she was, crying inside. Even in death, she wouldn't stop crying. She drove me to this. I knew it. But that didn't even stop the cries. It only made them louder in my ears. I shouted, "Stop crying, for Christ's sake, let me sleep." With that I heard a noise behind. I was wondering what it was, who it was. I turned to see a dark figure. I asked in fear, "Hello, who's there?" I then saw my wife's psychologist standing right in front of me. I asked, "What are you doing here?" The psychologist said, "This is the only way to get ye back together, as in really united." I stared in bewilderment. The psychologist picked up my shovel and banged me in the head, and I fell into the grave. It was when he covered me in dirt, was when my wife finally stopped crying. Me and my friends were having an awesome New Year's Eve party. I started speaking to a girl called Krista when things started getting a bit weird.
We were alone in a room and she started speaking about New Year's resolutions. She looked me in the eye and asked, "Do you know where the dark goes when the light comes on? Do you know where the light goes in the dark?" I never heard these questions before and just smiled at her and said, "I guess it disappears. I don't know." Then she said to me, "What if it was still here?" I asked her, "What do you mean? What if what was still here?" "The light," she said. "What if the light was still here when it was dark? And where would the light go in the dark?" She kept talking about dark and light, so I stood up and walked out of the room and said, "Nice to meet you, Krista. Let's go outside. It's nearly midnight. We don't want to miss the fireworks." I walked out to a group of my friends, excited, waiting for the fireworks. Krista came up to me again. She looked very serious and said in a serious tone, "You won't like it when you find out the answer." I asked her, "What do you mean?" She turned around and walked away. 5 minutes later, my friends lit the fireworks and everyone cheered until suddenly everything changed when a firework backfired into my stomach. I looked down and could see the fire burning in my stomach as I was screaming in pain. A few days later, when I was recovering in the hospital, a nurse walked into the room. When I saw who it was, I froze. It was Krista. She looked down at me and said, "I told you that you wouldn't like where the light goes when it's dark." Friday night, 2016. I was 8 at the time, when my brother, who was 10, and I were home alone. We stayed in our bedroom to play on our PS2. My brother went downstairs to make some meals for us to eat, while I was waiting. I needed to go to the bathroom so badly, so I went. Once I came back to play on my PS2, I saw my brother looking confused. I asked him, "What's wrong?" He replied, "Did you open the window?" I thought he was joking, so I laughed and said, "No, are you trying to scare me?" Then he didn't answer. I didn't mind, he sometimes ignores me. I went back to play on my PS2 when I heard a loud banging on the window. I couldn't see who it was since it was dark outside. I went outside with my brother and a flashlight. When we saw who it was a big tall white man with really blonde hair and a black hoodie. I quickly ran into the house, went to my kitchen to grab a knife and ran with my brother to the bathroom. While I was in the bathroom, I realized I left the door open. I cried in fear with my brother. We called 911. Then, when the cops arrived, they found the man dead. Days passed and I wondered if he wanted us to see him kill himself or worse. Me and my friend were enjoying our weekend in my new house, which my mom and dad told me was my great-grandmother's house. It was an awesome house which reminded me of houses you'd see in those cool mystery movies, big and mysterious. But since we moved in, which was just over a month ago, my mom and dad told me not to go into a certain room downstairs. The door was locked, but I knew my dad kept the key in his drawer, as I saw him put it there last week. We entered the room and nothing looked out of place. It was just an empty room apart from a chair and a closet with stuffed birds on top of it. I then stood on the chair and picked up one of the birds. Suddenly, a woman who we never laid eyes on before started shouting at us. I wondered who was this crazy woman and what was she doing in our house. We both ran out of the room and locked the door, and I rang my dad right away, explaining what had just happened. He got mad at me when he came home, saying he told us to not ever go into that room. Then he asked me what the lady looked like. When I explained to him, me and my friend felt shivers up our spine when he had said we just described his great-grandmother. A few minutes later, he showed us an old black and white photograph of her. This woman was dead for over 50 years. The next day in school, we were in nature class, and my teacher said, "Well, class, today I have a very special guest to tell us all about birds." Me and my friend felt like we couldn't move with fear when we saw the lady who entered the room was my great-grandmother. Suddenly, everyone else in the class seemed to vanish into thin air, and it was just me and my friend and my great-grandmother. The classroom window smashed and loads of birds started flying around the room. Me and my friend screamed and ran home. When I got home and explained what happened in school, things got even weirder when my dad told us today was Saturday and there was no school. He then showed me a journal he had kept from my great-grandmother. It said, "My father was arguing with my mother again, and I am crying now because he shot my pet birds. The only thing I had to keep me sane in this crazy house." I then suddenly felt sorry for my great-grandmother and realised she wasn't dangerous after all. She was just a lost soul in this world that got angry at anyone interfering with the birds in her room. So now I am not afraid of my great-grandmother. I look at her stuffed birds and pray that in the other world she will soon find peace. And now I don't look at her as a crazy woman. I look at her as what I call her, the bird lady. I had a long day and even longer night and was so tired getting home. I knew that my husband would be fast asleep when I got home. I crept upstairs quietly and got dressed for bed, then crept in, not to wake my husband. I was just about to go to sleep when I heard something. I thought it was my husband up and about, but then I knew it wasn't, as I could hear his snoring. Thankfully, my husband didn't snore loud, but I could hear his faint snoring, which told me he was definitely asleep. I had no pets, so it couldn't have been a cat or a dog. I froze in my bed when I heard another noise. This time, it was in my room. I didn't move and opened my eyes just a fraction. I could see a dark figure across my room wearing a ski mask. The figure was over by my jewellery. My heart thumped in my chest and I felt like screaming, but didn't want to advertise I was here. I knew, of course, whoever it was had seen me, but I closed my eyes and pretended to be asleep, hoping they would leave and I could wake my husband and lock the door and call the police. I didn't want them to know I was awake for fear of some altercation where anything could happen. Whoever was in the room, it could be a crazy man or woman, they could be a serial killer or just some crazy addict. All these crazy thoughts ran through my mind as my heart beat faster and faster as I felt sweat fall from my brow onto my cheek. I continued to be asleep. I could hear footsteps on my carpet, but couldn't figure out which part of my room they were coming from. Suddenly, they stopped. I listened intently for more movement, but heard none. I hoped and prayed whoever was in my room were making their way downstairs now and would leave my house immediately. But I froze in fear when I heard a sinister voice in my ear say, "I know you're awake." Sam was reading a blog post on a website which was advertising an amazing deal on a hotel room. The room was only $1 to stay in for the night. He saw a photo of the room on the site. It wasn't fancy or anything, but he knew by spending the night in this hotel room, in particular in this city which he wanted to visit, for just a measly $1, could allow him to have most of his money for spending. There was one catch, but nothing that he couldn't handle. After all, he would be mostly sleeping. You might wonder why that would matter. I'll tell you why. The one condition is that the room will be streamed live on a website. It didn't mention the website, so Sam had no links to check it out. He didn't even know who has stayed there before him, or even if anyone has ever stayed there yet. When Sam arrived at the hotel, he met a man who greeted him with a pleasant smile and showed him into a room. He told him that the live stream will be starting in an hour. He thanked the man and then laid down on the bed checking his social media. An hour later he checked the laptop that was on a table over from his bed. He checked the viewer count. 1, 12, 36, 70. They seemed to be logging in very fast. He sat back waving into the camera at his audience, feeling like some kind of reality star. The views were past 300 now, 350, 400, 470, 500, 525, 590, 620. Then the views stopped at 666. Which he found kind of weird. Suddenly he heard a roaring noise, and then something attacked him from behind. Blood splattered all over the room after the frenzied attack. That's when the 666 Satanists licked their lips in satisfaction, watching Sam get slaughtered from the beast, knowing their pact with the devil worked. They had summoned the beast by using a spell from 666 of them to log on, and the number of the beast conjured the beast right when the 666th Satanist logged on. Afterwards, the laptop was taken from the room, and the police were clueless why a beheaded corpse was lying in the middle of a blood-stained hotel room. The scene was of panic and despair, as a truck had knocked down an old man trying to cross the road. A man appeared to have tried to give the man CPR, but unknown to everyone watching, the man who appeared to have tried to be the first to help the man was just an opportunist, and stole the man's wallet. He waved to the crowd as if to say he couldn't do anything, The man walked down the street, checking the wallet. It was full of notes and had a strange-looking coin in it. Suddenly, as he looked up from the wallet, a car hit him, straight on, knocking him dead. Crowds gathered around in terror, seeing the man's bloodied body underneath the car. The man's wallet fell out of his hand, and the coin rolled onto the footpath where a passerby picked it up. It was a habit they had whenever they found a coin. They picked it up as a lucky coin. They were walking home that night, and before they could cross the road to their home, a truck ran right over him. Later that night, the news was covering the story of the 3 accidents. The last victim was a man who taught high school students at a local school. The second victim was a man who was on vacation, and the first victim was a homeless man who met the description of a man who stole a wallet from a witch doctor just an hour before his accident. The witch doctor was angry at his curse working wrong. He had wanted the curse to end after the first man was killed, coming into possession of the magic coin, not kill 2 more innocent victims who had nothing to do with stealing it. Walking down the street, the witch doctor noticed something on the ground. It shone up on him under the streetlight. It couldn't be, he said to himself. A few seconds later, a truck beeped the horn, but it was too late. He was ran over and killed instantly. It all started when I visited a paranormal night where a paranormal expert was giving a demonstration on different types of paranormal activity, from ghost hunting to seances gone wrong to voodoo dolls. I introduced myself to the woman afterwards, praising her for hosting such a great night. She told me she was going to visit the bridge of Lucifer she was talking about and asked me did I want to go and check it out with her. She was telling me, like what she said earlier, there has to be 3 women, or else, if there were only 2, then the women would feel angry and very, very afraid. It would not happen if there was 1 or 3 or any more. It would only happen to 2 women together. The reason for it is because the bridge is meant to be possessed by the goat-headed boy. The woman told me that if I'd like to bring along a friend, then she will show me the bridge, and not to worry, as there will be 3 of us there. The background story was a boy was bullied years ago and fell by accident over the bridge. The boy was bullied by 2 girls, so anytime there are 2 girls on the bridge or 2 women, they feel angry because of the boy's spirit messing with them. A few days later, me and my friend and a lady were approaching the bridge. Before I stepped more onto it, I asked the lady, was she sure it was safe us walking onto the bridge? She said, of course, it's perfectly fine. There are 3 females on the bridge, not 2. If you were here without me, then yes, ye would feel the anger and fear. I suddenly felt strange. I had a weird feeling to attack the paranormal host, and looking at my friend, I knew she felt the same. Was this the anger if there was only 2 of us? I asked the host, does it affect men? The host said, no, it only affects 1 man. I asked, what do you mean? Then the woman pulled off a wig and said angrily, because I am the 1 man who is affected by my son's death, and I am the 1 man who will be able to summon his spirit by throwing ye off that bridge. With that, he was about to push us off when the man was blown back and a little boy appeared and said, stop, They're not the ones who killed me. Me and my friend got up on our 2 feet and ran as fast as we could, and when we felt safe, we rang the police. The man who was posing as the paranormal female host was arrested, and we heard later the story he told us was true, and after researching it online, I read lots of different stories that women felt angry and scared whenever there were 2 together. I was thankful the spirit of the little boy saved us, and felt sorry for his tormented soul stuck out there on that bridge that is called Bridge of Lucifer.